You are in the ladies' room with Dr. Donica, the only public ladies' room you can enter anytime without ever waiting online. I'm your host, Dr. Donica Moore. We'll be having real conversations with real women about really intimate issues. They may be embarrassing, sad, or funny, but they will always be interesting and informative. You know, like the best conversations you've had in ladies' rooms with your best friends, or total strangers and a physician. Please join us. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another exciting episode of In the Ladies' Room with Dr. Donica. And I will warn you, today I have a man with me. This is actually only the second man we've invited into the ladies' room. And it's because he really has something for us. And that is the answer to how to lose weight while you sleep. Could it be any better than that? Now, when you don't have a restful night's sleep, it can affect, of course, your mood, your health, your family, and even your job. But most people did not know that it can also affect not only your weight, but your actual struggles with weight management. So whether you're struggling with insomnia, looking to improve your sleep, or looking for help with weight management, our next guest has the tools, tips, and secret resources which can help all of us. And all of this information is derived from the science of sleep medicine research.
Correct.
Dr. Michael Breus is a clinical psychologist, a diplomate of the American Board of Sleep Medicine, and a fellow of the American Academy of Sleep Medicine. He is one of only 168 psychologists in the world with his credentials and his distinctions. I'm going to ask him how he figured that out. We met several years ago in the green rooms, actually at a Fox News show. I think it was the morning show with Mike and Juliet.
Yes.
But then we ran into each other in the green rooms of all these different TV shows and doing the rounds. I admit I may have picked his brain a few times for my own personal sleep questions, especially when I was shopping for a new mattress. I mean, I think he actually not only helped me get a great mattress, but save a lot of money. So, of course, I love him for that. Dr. Breus and I are both on the clinical advisory board of the Dr. Oz show, although he has appeared much more frequently than I have, clocking in 39 appearances.
Yes, indeed.
He's also a best-selling author of 3 books, or at least 3 books that I know of. The Power of When, which discusses the science of chronobiology, which we've been talking about lately with respect to the microbiome. He's the author of The Sleep Doctor's Diet Plan, which we're going to focus on, and Beauty Sleep, which I want to hear a little bit more about that. And of course, I told him that I would love to have time to discuss all these books today, but that in the interest of narrowing down the topic and in the interest of time, my audience really wants to know how to lose weight while they sleep. And of course, by my audience, I meant me. Now, he has given hundreds of presentations to Fortune 500 companies. He is the inaugural Sleep Technology Ambassador at Health 2.0, put on by the National Sleep Foundation. He is the sleep expert for WebMD for more than 14 years. And he's a writer for the Insomnia blog, the Huffington Post, Psychology Today, ShareCare, and the Oz blog. In his spare time, he is also a principal researcher on numerous grant-funded clinical research trials. Dr. Breus, welcome to the ladies' room.
I love this, the ladies' room. I've never been in the ladies' room.
Is this your first time you've ever been in the ladies' room?
I'm a virgin. I'm a ladies' room virgin. So
well, your mom must have brought you into the ladies' room once or twice.
At least once or twice.
At least once or twice. You'll have to touch base with her and ask her for the details on that. And normally I ask our guests to tell me what their most interesting, unique, different, exciting, or memorable occasion was in a ladies' room. But I'm guessing this is it.
I was going to say, I think I'm experiencing it right now.
Actually, do you have a daughter?
I do.
And have you ever had to bring her into the men's room when she was little?
When she was itty bitty, sure. Absolutely. Mm-hmm. Well, by that time they started having family bathrooms.
Right.
So it was
I keep forgetting how young you are.
Well, I just turned 50, so I don't know how young I am, but
welcome.
Yeah, thanks. I know. I kind of like it. I kind of like this whole feeling of 50. I've been very fortunate. My grandfather passed away when he was 103 and 10 months.
Wow.
So I've got the genetics to go the distance. So now I'm trying to work on this form factor here and make sure that it stays in decent shape so I can make it the distance. You know, I don't want to be one of those race cars that crosses the finish line with the engine sputtering and all 4 tires flat. I'd like to kind of hit it running and be in great health as my life goes.
And sleep is a critical part of that most of us have really overlooked. So tell me about how sleep factors into crossing the finish line with all your engines on fire.
Yeah, well, so here's the thing is sleep affects every organ system and every disease state. There is literally nothing that goes on from a biological perspective and emotional perspective that doesn't get affected by sleep. Now, sleep can be good or sleep can be of poor quality, and that's where we come into the idea of sleep deprivation. You know, historically, most people have thought of sleep deprivation as not getting enough sleep, just in terms of minutes or hours or whatnot. But we really also need to think of it not just as a quantity issue, but also as a quality issue. And that's where we get into things like sleep disorders. And there's a lot of women's health issues that almost nobody talks about that are directly affected by sleep. So I'm open for any and all of it. But you did ask me to tell you how I came up with that statistic of 168 psychologists. So I'll tell you, because it actually was very easy to develop that statistic. So it turns out that I'm one of 168 psychologists who've ever taken and passed a medical specialty board without going to medical school.
See, now I wish I could have figured out how to do that before I went to medical school. And
Right.
that's where all of my sleep disturbances started.
Absolutely.
Was in medical school. So one of the things I rant and rave about
Right.
is that as physicians, we
Oh, yeah.
advise patients about, all of these strategies for good health, and we don't do it ourselves. And that's not only where I picked up the bad habit of never sleeping, which
Right.
was of course reinforced by residency in OBGYN, but
Right.
that's where I also picked up my really terrible caffeine habit, which I am very proud to say that I finally overcame less than
All
6 months
right.
ago. I just went cold turkey. I just
Oh,
couldn't take it anymore.
wow.
But I just had a flashback to our first conversation when we first met.
Okay.
I was doing an interview. My topic that day was on chronic fatigue syndrome.
hmm
And so you and I were talking about the role of
Oh, yes.
non-refreshing sleep in
Right.
chronic fatigue syndrome and fibromyalgia,
Yeah.
which are just two actual disorders that are critically related, not only to sleep, but sleep deprivation. So how many sleep disorders are there?
So it turns out, according to the American Academy of Sleep Medicine, there are 88 different sleep disorders.
I
I
have
mean,
all of them.
right. Well, it's so funny because you think in your head, like, could I really have could somebody mess up 88 different ways in their sleep? But the truth of the matter is they can. Now, we all know that we basically in clinic treat about 5. So sleep apnea is kind of the biggie. And snoring, of course, goes with sleep apnea, any type of respiratory disturbance. And so we know that that's kind of the big one. And to be honest with you, 90% of the sleep specialists out there, that's what they treat day in
Oh,
and
really?
day out. Yeah,
So
when
from
I'm
a
in,
women's health perspective, sleep apnea, of course, increases over 50. It increases after menopause,
exactly.
but it's more common in men. And the sleep problem is for the partner of the person who is sleeping with the person with sleep apnea. And you want to just give the 20,000 foot overview of sleep apnea for people who are not familiar with it?
Absolutely. So sleep apnea is a situation where you stop breathing at night. Generally speaking, we like our patients to breathe, right? It's good. We're looking for that on a regular
We're
basis.
big fans.
We're big fans of breathing. And what happens is that the throat actually collapses upon itself. Now, sometimes that there can be a narrowing due to large tonsils, due to other types of inflammation. You mentioned earlier on in the interview that you've been speaking a lot with your group about the microbiome. There's now data to suggest that microbiome can have effects on a lot of different areas. And the microbiome is actually circadian influenced. I wrote a blog about that fairly recently. But when you look at sleep apnea, you really need to think stop breathing, because that's really what apnea means. And believe it or not, there are different types. One is an obstructive, where there's actually a blockage in your throat. But then there's a central sleep apnea, where your brain tells your lungs don't breathe. That's much more serious, much more difficult to treat, and requires a whole kind of different area of excellence and specialty. The other disorders that we have a tendency to treat in clinic are narcolepsy, restless leg syndrome, and periodic limb movements. And then I have a subspecialty in insomnia. Now, I use my psychological background because, let's be honest, 75% of insomnia is between your ears, okay?
Mhm.
You know, it's either anxiety or depression that a lot of times is fueling that insomnia. And that's really kind of where I specialize. And it has a lot to do with weight loss and weight gain, because when women aren't sleeping, or men aren't sleeping well, there's a lot of things that happen from a hormonal perspective that directly affect our ability to gain or lose weight.
Mhm. So I'm also thinking that in the past few years, or since you've become a sleep specialist, it's not just what's between our ears, but also what's between our eyes that
Yes. Oh,
is
yes.
responsible for keeping us up late at night. And that is, I'm very guilty of that. So
Well,
talk
I can
about the
teach you a
role.
couple of tricks on
Yeah,
that.
well, the number one trick is leaving your phone in another room.
Yes. Well, that it would be great if anybody actually did that, but unfortunately nobody does. But that's why I said 75%, because the other 25% is either medically induced or environmentally induced,
Mhm.
right? And by medically, it can be some type of medical situation, like hyperthyroidism is a great example. Or Hashimoto's, where we've got the up-down regulation of thyroid that can cause bouts of insomnia quite easily. We know that a lot of people going through chemotherapy have significant insomnia, fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue, those type of things. But also, there's a lot of medications out there
Mhm.
that can cause insomnia as well.
What are the
And
worst offenders aside from caffeine?
right, right, exactly. And like as an example, I was treating a patient who was using a medication called Wellbutrin, which
Mhm.
is it's a antidepressant, or kind of, but it's very, very stimulating. I actually treated a narcoleptic patient with Wellbutrin alone
Mm.
without having to actually use stimulants. So we have to
Wow.
be super careful in that. And then, of course, the food we eat and the supplements we take and all that other stuff can actually have a pretty big effect as well.
So Wellbutrin is an example of a drug that it would make a big difference what time of day that you take it. And
Exactly.
that gets into the whole chronobiology
See, there you go.
issues. Yeah, no,
Yeah.
I'm a quick study on this. So what are some of the other medicines? I mean, a lot of people, for example, I always joke about caffeine because that's what I joke about. And that was my Achilles heel for many
Right.
years. But a lot of people don't know that there are some over-the-counter medications that have caffeine in them, like my
Oh,
personal
yeah.
favorite Excedrin migraine,
Yep.
which is one of the main reason it works for migraine, is because caffeine
Yeah.
is a special agent. But
Yeah.
what
And,
other medications are common over-the-counter
mhm.
medications that people need to think about?
Well, a lot of the pain relievers use caffeine as a transport mechanism to kind of get it there faster, or to
Mhm.
get your metabolism moving quicker. And that's really is one of the primary areas. Of course, a lot of the weight loss over the counter stuff is loaded with caffeine. And by the way, sometimes they don't call it caffeine. They
Mhm.
call it things like guarana. It used to be ephedra. So, when you're in the health food store, or, the vitamin place or what have you, and you're looking at supplements and you're trying to do the healthy, right thing,
Mhm.
you really need to look at that ingredient list and talk with your doctor and make sure that all of those ingredients are going to be healthy and healthful for you, because many of them, while they might work great if you take them in the
Mhm.
morning, if you take them at night, it can be a significant problem. And I just recently started working. I found an evening drink that you mix with coffee, a very mild amount of coffee, and it allows you to only have about 50 milligrams of coffee. There's this mushroom tea, or mushroom mix that people are now using to add things like lion's mane and a couple of other things that appear, I'm not sold on the science yet, but appear to have some healthy benefits. But of course, it lowers the caffeine, because the average amount of caffeine you're seeing in a cup of coffee is about 90 to 100 milligrams.
Mhm.
And National Sleep Foundation and the board say, you really need to keep it under 250 to 300 milligrams a day, if that. But the
Well,
truth
yeah.
is, well, I was just going to say, the truth is, if you're sleeping well and you're getting good rest, you probably shouldn't need it, right? I mean,
I
there's
never argue with anybody who tells me that something is working for them.
right.
Of course, what I always tell people is after 7 o'clock at night, you should
Yeah.
probably avoid caffeine unless you're driving somewhere. But speaking of
Yeah.
nighttime drinks that
Uh-huh.
some of us indulge in from time to time, talk about the
Sure.
role of alcohol on sleep.
Oh, yeah. Of course. So
Bad
first of
trick.
all, yes. So first of all, I am not a teetotaler. I have no problems with alcohol. I like a lovely glass of wine or a spirit before dinner or something like that. But you got to remember something, is that everybody out there needs to think through this idea of a couple things. First of all, we know that there's a really big difference between going to sleep and passing out, right? So we have to get that straight, first of all. when we drink alcohol, aside from it decreasing inhibitions and lowering frontal lobe and all those things that it does, it actually detracts us from being able to get into stages 3 and 4 sleep. Now, the reason that's so important is stages 3 and 4 sleep are the physically restorative sleep that our body gets. And that actually happens in the first third of the night, which is when the alcohol is most present. So we really have to be careful. A couple of quick facts and tricks that I teach people if you want to have a couple of glasses of wine with dinner, which, by the way, I got no problems with. So number one, remember.
If you're not driving.
If you're not driving, for sure. Number one, it takes the average human body approximately 1 hour to digest through one alcoholic beverage. So if you have 2 glasses of wine with dinner and you finish dinner at 8, then by 10 o'clock, you're okay for lights out, right? What you don't want to do is go to bed anywhere between 8 and 10, because that's when the alcohol is going to have a major effect, not get you into those good deep stages. Number 2, alcohol is a diuretic. So, if you drink a bunch of it before bed, guess what? You're going to have to pee. So that can be very disruptive to sleep as well.
Welcome to the 50s.
I know. I just got here. I'm already getting concerned. But one of the things I ask my patients to do is to have a glass for a glass. So 1 glass of water for every glass of alcohol. Number 1, it slows down the volume of alcohol that's going into the system in general. But number 2, it keeps you hydrated. Another thing that a lot of people don't realize is we breathe out in our breath, the humidity of our breath. We lose almost a liter of water every night. So we wake up dehydrated. Now, if you add alcohol in front of that, where it's already making you pee too much, you're going to wake up your throat's going to be the Sahara Desert. And you could even wake up in the middle of the night, become thirsty, start drinking water. It's a mess. So at the end of the day, if you just take 1 hour for every beverage and you add it on to the last beverage, that's when you can go to sleep at the right time.
All right. So since we're talking about alcohol and we already talked about medications,
yep.
For the benefit of the Kennedy family, please talk about the
prescription med, Ambien,
alcohol and sleep medications.
So just about the dumbest thing you could possibly do is mix alcohol with any of what we call the Z drugs, Zopiclone, and that's like Ambien, Lunesta, Sonata, all of that. I'm giving the generic name. So you really don't want to do this, because if you think you're
and those are all the prescription sleep products.
Yes.
And I would add things like Valium and Xanax, which people also think are sleep medications, which really aren't supposed to be for sleep.
Yeah, they're really more anti-anxiety medications, at least historically, kind of fall into a class called benzodiazepines, which is a really bad idea to mix alcohol with, because here's the thing. So you bring up an excellent point, right? So looking at Valium, Xanax, even Restoril, some of those classic sleep meds that are in that category of benzodiazepines, those are respiratory drive reducers, right? And if you add alcohol, which also suppresses respiratory drive, you get to really shallow breathing. You get to people where they stop breathing, and not from an apnea perspective, but just from a stop breathing perspective. So again, really stupid idea mixing alcohol with any type of a sleep aid. Now, if you had a glass of wine at 6 o'clock and you're not going to bed until 11 o'clock, okay, I think that's probably okay. But at the end of the day, if you can avoid that, avoid it, because it just doesn't make any sense to have these two things anywhere near each other, because the amnesia that you get is significant. You really won't remember anything that happens. Also, by the way, the sleep you get is really crappy, because the alcohol is preventing you from getting good sleep. So you're almost doing the opposite of what the pill is supposed to help you do. So it doesn't make a lot of sense.
Right. And we talked about prescription sleep aids, but now talk about my number one pet peeve, which is over-the-counter sleep aid, and in particular, Benadryl.
Yep. So as you mentioned, I was the WebMD sleep expert for 15 years. And way back in the day, they had these things called message boards, where somebody would post a question and then some monkey behind the screens I was the monkey behind the scenes who was answering all these questions about sleep.
It's now called Twitter.
Right, exactly. And once a month, I would get the question, is it okay to have a box of Benadryl a night?
A box?
A box, okay? 18 10 milligram tabs. Okay, the answer is no, it's not okay, right? And honestly, literally,
it's not okay to have a box a month.
It's not okay to have a box of anything, right? Much less a box a night, right? But here's what happens is Benadryl doesn't actually make you sleepy. Remember, Benadryl is an antihistamine, and the way the compound was built, it was built to last for 8 to 12 hours. So first of all, you can almost be guaranteed to get a hangover, because if you take it at 10, it's not going to be out of your system until 10 the next day. So you're going to be fuzzy drug head while you're driving to work and slurping the coffee and hoping for the best, right? So again, not a great idea. Number two is when it doesn't actually make you sleepy. It gives you fuzzy drug head, right? And so all that does is it relaxes you enough for your natural sleep process to take over. You could do the same thing with Benadryl as you can with meditation, with relaxation. There's a lot of better ways to go about doing it than popping a Benadryl or one of the PM medications. Because by the way, that's all those are.
Right. That's what the Tylenol PM, Advil PM, all of those things, the active sleeping ingredient is just Benadryl or diphenhydramine. Talk about, though, the rebound effect as well.
Yes. So first of all, there's a couple of things that can go on. Number one is I actually have some patients who have a paradoxical reaction and they get energized. Right. And like my daughter is one who, if we give her Benadryl, we got to peel her off the ceiling. She's so hyperactive. Same thing can happen for folks at night, number one. But, also when you look at the rebound, if you haven't been getting good sleep, all of a sudden now you start to feel sleepier and sleepier and sleepier in the middle of the day, things of that nature. So you really have to be super duper careful with these things. I tell people all the time, your body's a chemistry set. And as you start sticking stuff in it, you're going to get reactions. And you just need to really be thoughtful and careful about it. If you're not sleeping well, look around. You pointed out two great things already, caffeine and blue light, right? So, when we're talking about
blue light being the screen time.
Right. These devices here, right? There's a lot of data to show that the last thing that people do is check their phone and check their Facebook before bed. And the first thing that they do is wake up in the morning and check their phone and check their email. So, we've got these electronic devices by our beds and in our rooms constantly. Now, I'm going to admit something here in the ladies' room, okay?
This is where we let the hair down and all the truth.
I don't have a lot of hair left, but
then you need to listen to our episode from last week with Dr. Angela Phipps, who's a hair expert. She was fabulous. I can't wait to listen to that. I didn't even know there was a board specialty in medicine for hair restoration.
I didn't either, but that sounds pretty cool.
You're going to love her episode.
So let me tell you what happens in my house. Okay. So I have a king size bed and I'm asleep here. My French bulldog is right next to me. Then is my Chihuahua. Then is my wife. Then is the cat. Okay. And occasionally a child will burrow in from the bottom and end up in there because that's my life. Right. And that's how it goes. We have a big screen TV and my wife falls asleep to the TV on every single night.
Does she know she's married to a sleep expert?
I'm the sleep doctor, for God's sakes. Okay. I'm admitting this in the ladies' room. All bets are off in the ladies' room. Right. But
you can tell her that Dr. Donica said that the only purpose of being in the bed is sleep or sex, and preferably when no children are in the bed.
Exactly. Both of those activities. So here's why so first of all, when I met my wife and she said, by the way, I fall asleep with the television on, I said, don't worry, I'm going to fix you of that. Right. So,
how many years ago was that?
We've been married for 19 years. Okay. So, I learned long ago that if I try to fix anything in my partner, it's probably not going to go so well.
And that's really good dating and relationship advice to start with, is that when you enter a relationship thinking I'm going to fix something, that should be a big red flag.
Yes, correct. But here's what I observed and here's what I learned. Is she doesn't actually watch the television. She listens, right? Her eyes are closed, and I call it listening out of the corner of her ear because it's usually an old episode of Seinfeld or, something that it's not important. It doesn't require a lot of attention, but it's distracting enough to turn down the monkey mind that we all have sometimes going to bed. The number one complaint that I hear is I can't turn off my brain before sleep. And this was her way of doing it. Let me tell you something. 95% of televisions now have timers in their software.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Absolutely.
So said the person who does not have a television in her bedroom?
Well, that's fantastic. Look, we can't all be as good of an example as you are.
No, but I have a cell phone and an iPad.
Okay, so I'm going to tell you about why those are bad in a second. So the television in and of itself, we can control in certain ways. Also, by the way, proximity wise, it's all the way across the room. Your eyes are oftentimes closed. It's not that big of an influence. But, you know, if you've got one of these deals or a tablet or a laptop and it's right here, the proximity is much closer. So you're getting a far bigger amount of light exposure, number one. Number two, there was a recent study that just came out of RPI in Rochester, New York, that showed that the software fix on the phones, which is supposed to dampen the light, doesn't work at all. It has zero effect on melatonin suppression. It actually, if you put on, I think it's called night shift on my phone. If you put night shift on, it still suppresses melatonin.
Well, right? I turn it way down to the actual brightness, way down. But you brought up melatonin, which, you know.
Oh, no, I'm going to get there too. I promise. I promise. I'm gunning for you. Don't worry.
I know. You're on it.
I got lots of content to bring to your group.
Questions.
Yeah, I got lots of content to bring to your tribe. So when we look at this, the proximity is close, but the engagement is even more so, right? If you're trying to get your high score on Candy Crush right before bed, I'm sorry.
I told you not to tell anybody that's my drug of choice.
I hear you, but
actually, I'm a Words with Friends kind of girl.
Right. So my daughter loves that game, but before bed, no. Now I'm going to give you one fix even better. If that's the only way for you to get through it and be able to make it, they now make glasses called blue blocker glasses. And they're not very expensive. You can find them on Amazon.
Are these the same blue blocker sunglasses that used to be a thing?
So way back in the 70s, there was a thing called blue blockers. It's actually, it's not too dissimilar technology, but now fast forward to, 2018, technology's gotten much, much better. We can actually block out. So the reason that we call it blue light is it actually turns out that it's a very particular part of the spectrum of light. So when you look at a white light, there's all of the spectrum is in there. It turns out that just specifically the 450 to 480 nanometers, which is considered blue, hits a very particular cell in your eye called a melanopsin cell. This cell actually sends a signal to your brain to turn off the melatonin faucet in your pineal gland, which is why blue light before bed is bad. So you can actually wear these little blue blockers and still do all kinds of stuff. The reason I discovered this is my children both are on computers all day at school. And they were complaining that their eyes were hurting. And so I started researching and trying to find, could I find a corrective lens or something like that? And then I remembered about the blue light and started thinking about that. And I was like, gosh, what would work out well? And so I gave these to my son and to my daughter. And I said, look, when 8 o'clock comes around, just put these on. And you can wear them around the house. None of your friends are going to see you, whatever. It's not going to look goofy. I'll wear them too. And so all of a sudden what we get is a lack of blue light exposure, which is great because it slowly starts to get our brains in tune with the idea of sleeping. So even if you have television in the other room, but you can have those blue blockers on, just about an hour before bed, it really starts to get your body in line. Because, folks have to remember, sleep's not an on-off switch. It's more like slowly pulling your foot off the gas and slowly putting your foot on the brake. There's a process that needs to occur. And we need to start setting our body up for better sleep, maybe 30 to 60 minutes before bed. Now, you asked about melatonin. So can I talk a little bit of that? Because we were also talking supplements before.
Please.
Okay, so here's my thing on melatonin. So first of all, melatonin is a hormone. All right? Let's just get that straight, right? You wouldn't walk down to the local health food store and say, hey, I'd like a little estrogen or a little testosterone,
Actually,
please.
There are people who do that.
Right. Well, they don't get it, hopefully. But you know what I'm saying? Like, this is a hormone. It's not an herb. It's not some innocuous thing. So you really need to kind of think through the idea of putting a hormone into your system. That's number one. Number two, it's not regulated by the FDA. So that's a bigger problem because the quality can be suspect. I could make melatonin in my garage and I could sell it at the local health food store. And that's a perfectly legal thing to do. So really looking for the purity standards becomes important. But there's even more problems with melatonin. 95% of melatonin is sold in an overdosage format. The correct dose in order for plasma concentration levels to reach a point where it can be effective for sleep is somewhere between 0.5 and 1.5 milligrams. Almost all melatonin is sold in 3, 5, and 10 milligram dosages. Okay, and people think, just like with Benadryl, more is better, and so they're just popping tons of this stuff. By the way, melatonin can interact with your hypertension medication, make it less effective. Melatonin at high dosages can give you very bad dreams. Also, interestingly, data out of Germany would suggest that at very high dosages, melatonin is actually a contraceptive.
Okay.
Yes.
Now,
Yeah.
define very high dosages. What?
Well, we're talking about 50, 60 milligrams, right?
Oh, well,
But
that's
here,
crazy.
well, you'd
Except
be
for
shocked.
your guy on
Right.
online who wants to take a whole box of
Of
Benadryl.
Benadryl, right. But here's where it gets interesting for me is I did a melatonin expose on Dr. Oz,
Mm-hmm.
and we got thousands and thousands of emails from parents
Mm-hmm.
saying, I give melatonin to my children, okay? I can't think of anything worse for a young female developing reproductive system than the introduction of a hormone that can also at high dosages be a contraceptive. Like, melatonin is not meant for people age 18 or lower. Period, end of story. Number two, none of them have a melatonin deficiency, okay? None of them. Now, there is one caveat, which is fairly interesting. There's a good body of literature looking at melatonin in spectrum kids, so kids on the autism spectrum. 4 to 5 milligrams, believe it or not, is actually very effective in that group. We don't 100% know why, but that group has so many difficulties in general, and getting them to sleep, even sleeping just a little bit better with melatonin, feels like it's a good idea. And again, there's a decent body of literature behind us to look at something like that. But melatonin is great for things like jet lag. Right? Melatonin is good when your body is one place and your brain is kind of, in another.
So
right?
when you're
That's
talking
what
about
melatonin
jet
is.
lag, what dose are you recommending for grown-ups?
Sure. So for grownups, again, you want to stick to the 0.5 to 1.5 milligrams, kind of based on body weight. So the way I do it is I always start all of my female patients off at 0.5 milligram, my male patients off at 1 milligram if they're over 150 pounds for the men. And then I can slowly titrate up. I never go past 1.5 milligrams.
So you made a good point about gender differences in doses, because this is also an issue with prescription sleep medications.
Absolutely.
Is that we used to just prescribe, one dose fits all
right.
for, all adults. And we
Forever.
know that in general, women do much better with half of the standard dose.
Well, and what's also interesting is, for example, they came out with recommendations now that, for example, for using Ambien or anything like it, women should max out at 5 milligrams, not 10 milligrams. Right. So again, we're starting to think through this idea.
Here's what I recommend to people. I recommend that everybody get one of those little pill cutters at the drugstore.
Yeah, absolutely.
$5. And you can get a 10 milligram dose and just chop it in half. And same thing with the
and then it lasts twice as long.
Same thing with the Benadryl. If you need Benadryl because of bad allergies, which I think for bad allergies, it's an awesome drug. But I also recommend cutting it in half and taking a half first. And if you don't get relief of whatever severe nighttime allergy symptoms you're having, then you could take another half.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of less medicine is better in general.
I just lost you on the sound.
Oh, I can hear you just fine.
I'm getting crackling.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you, but with a lot of crackling. Can talk again.
Hello.
Oh, much better. Okay.
Oh,
I guess the Russians are listening in on my podcast. They always do that. And I've asked the NSA to, really
to stop that
sound quality. No, I don't mind if they do. They can learn
something. They deserve to get healthy too, right?
And they need sleep because they're monitoring all of my transmissions at all times.
Along with the Chinese, but that's a whole nother story.
Right. But in all seriousness.
Right.
Of course, melatonin, we talked about jet lag. I love your concept of this being, a hormone. And I, of course knew that, but I never really processed that in terms of thinking about why we might not want to be giving that to our children.
Yeah, I don't like the idea of instituting a hormone in children, period. However, there's one more instance where it actually could make sense to use melatonin, and that's in people of my age and higher. So we know that right around age 50 to 55 is where melatonin production actually begins to slow down for neurologic melatonin, not gut melatonin. By the way, most people don't know 80% of melatonin is made in your gut, not in your head. Melatonin is actually a tremendous antioxidant. It's actually used in other places in your body as well. But as we get older, our melatonin production begins to decline. And so when my patients who are 50, 55, if they tell me they're having trouble sleeping, one of the first things I talk to them about is, hey, maybe we should consider some melatonin supplementation. Let's try it at a very low dose at a very specific time. Oh, by the way, that's the other thing. Nobody tells people what time to take it.
So right? What time do you tell people to take it?
About between 60
minutes before bedtime.
No, it's between 60 and 90. And I'll tell you why.
So
Yeah, because it takes that long for plasma concentration levels to reach that point where it's actually
Wow.
effective. I think I know what the Russian signal is. Hold on one second. Hey, Olga, are you still vacuuming? Okay, you finished? Okay,
We
great.
are
Thank
taking
you.
a break while Dr. Breus checks on his housekeeper, interfering with our sound signal.
I apologize.
No problem. So talk to me about melatonin and alcohol.
So that's a really bad idea, generally speaking. So, because one of the things that happens, so melatonin is a sleep regulator, not a sleep initiator, right? And we need to think about that in that way. Remember, sleep is actually a function of two separate systems in the brain. There's sleep drive and there's sleep rhythm. Melatonin really only affects sleep rhythm. And so many people think I need to take that right before bed, like a sleeping pill, in order to make it effective. So when they figure out that that doesn't work, then they say, oh, I know the problem. I just need to have a glass of wine with my melatonin, and then it's all going to work out great. Monumentous bad idea. If you want to have your glass of wine, have it at dinner long before you ever even consider taking melatonin. But the interaction can be fairly significant. So I oftentimes am telling people, look, you don't want to add one bad with one good. Just keep it to two goods. And get to bed at a reasonable hour. But yeah, 60 minutes before bed, if you can take it, then you're going to find it to be far more effective.
And when you do recommend it for your patients, let's say in the 50 and older crowd,
yes,
are you recommending it for a short-term therapy or for a long-term therapy or a once in a while kind of a thing?
So it all depends upon the type of sleep issues that the individual is having. The first thing I do, honestly, is I have them do a melatonin saliva test. So you can purchase these kits, and I have them take their melatonin saliva right before bed, right when they wake up in the morning, so I can plot their melatonin curve to see if they really do have a deficiency. If they are having a deficiency,
obviously they would have to have been off melatonin for how long
correct,
before taking this test?
probably about a week or two.
Okay.
Really seems to be the amount of time that seems to work well. And then if it looks like, hey, you really do have a melatonin deficiency, then I start to kind of plot them through and kind of get them there. And the thing that people got to remember is everybody's sleep is not created equal, right? We all have different sleeps, and we go to bed at different times. We wake up at different times. We have different sleep drives. It all depends upon our fitness, our level of medical frailty, things of that nature. And so we can't think of all sleep as the same. We need to think about how is our sleep and what is affecting our sleep from our environment. We've talked about blue light. We've talked about supplements. We've talked about, by the way, just being a female is a really big sleep thing that nobody talks about. Okay. It's kind of fascinating. Yeah, well, I'm sure y'all do. I want to hang out in the ladies' room more often. Let me tell you.
You have an open invitation.
Sweet. I love it. I'm so excited.
No lines, no waiting. You could listen to us anytime on iTunes.
I love that. That's great. So, one of the things I'm often recommending to my patients is I actually give different bedtimes depending upon where they are in their cycle. Right? Because some women need to go to bed earlier prior to menstruation, and some women have so much energy afterwards they can't go to bed, but they think, oh, I've only got one kind of sleep and I need to go to bed at this time and wake up at this time. That's really not true, especially with women. You really need to kind of think through your body and what is your body telling you. I will tell you that the best thing that a woman can do, or anybody can do, is have a consistent wake up time. Even more so than bedtime, believe it or not, because when we wake up and our eyes open up and we get that sunlight in our eyes, that turns off that melatonin faucet and just boom, restarts our circadian clock. And that's really the key to sleep, is this whole circadian rhythm issue. And so
what if you're on a schedule where you're waking up and it's dark out?
Excellent question.
I hate daylight savings time.
Right. So I have a light box that I use with my patients. So by the way, you can go to Amazon, and the one I use, it's called the Go Light, Golite. I have no association with the company. It's by Philips, which is like the biggest company in the world. And they make a wonderful product. I actually recommended it to somebody today. It's less than $100, right? And there's one that's less than 50, and it gives 10,000 lux or lumens of light. And you don't put it right here and stare at it and then you can't see for the rest of the day. You just stick it right here, and while you're eating your bowl of cereal or getting ready in the morning.
So about how far away from your face?
I would say you could probably go a good 2 feet and it's perfectly fine. You just want it angled up so that it's kind of be coming into your eye. Again, you don't want to look directly into it. Of course, the best blue light is sunlight. And so a lot of times what I'm telling people is, instead of taking that, 1 o'clock coffee break, go outside for a 1 o'clock sunshine break. Number one, it will stop you from feeling sleepy, because you know how most people feel sleepy between 1 and 3 in the afternoon? It turns out that's actually a mild core body temperature drop, about 1/4 degree centigrade. And that's a signal to the brain to release melatonin. So if you walk outside and get the sunlight, you don't get the core body temperature drop, you don't get the melatonin release, and you don't feel sleepy.
All right. So that was spoken like somebody who lives in California. But
Which I
for
did.
those of us who live in really cold places where it snowed yesterday in April,
Oh, yeah.
is it the sunlight itself in
Yes.
your afternoon walk break, or does it matter what the outdoor temperature is?
It doesn't really matter what the outdoor temperature is. And you could actually get your sunlight just by standing by a window as well, as long as you're kind of looking out across. Again, don't look directly in the sun. We don't want people getting retinal damage and all this other kind of stuff. But sunlight really does help us reset that circadian clock. And if it's dark and dreary, or you live in Seattle or whatever, having this light box just on your desk can be very, very helpful. And, we've been using light therapy for people for a long time with depression for seasonal affective disorder, what's called SAD. So light is good. I believe that light is medicine. And so we need to think about the light that surrounds us and how it affects us. Look at the light bulbs that you've got in your children's bedrooms, in your bedrooms and things like that. Believe it or not, I have specialty light bulbs, and they're not expensive, that have melatonin, blue light filters inside them. And I keep those in my bedside table. And then I have the ones that have opposite in my bathroom. So don't tell my teenage children, but here's what I did, was I changed the light bulbs in their rooms to have the blue light filter, and the ones in their bathrooms so that they don't. And so it helps them fall asleep. They wear their blue blockers. I've got them dialed in. Oh yeah. And then in the morning,
but I forgot to ask you, with your wife needing the television on to fall asleep, how does that affect you?
I wear an eye mask.
And then how does she feel about sleeping with a guy who was wearing an eye mask to sleep with her?
As long as she gets to watch the TV, she doesn't care. We've been married for 19 years. She really doesn't care.
We talk about everything here in the ladies' room.
I'm here to be exposed, to tell it all, to tell everybody the inside.
If you were a woman, now here's where the gender issue gets a little complicated. If you were a woman, I would have naturally said, how does that affect your sex life? Are you turning on the TV after, or are you turning on the TV before?
Good question.
When does this happen?
I don't know.
Are you making out to Seinfeld episodes?
Are you asking me personally, or generally speaking?
No, I'm asking you.
Me personally?
How we are here.
We're more of a music sexual couple than we are a television sexual couple. And we have music by the bed. So there's certain tunes that we like. So,
and then afterwards the television goes on?
Sometimes, yeah.
Okay.
Just depends. It also depends upon the time of day for sex. In my newest book, The Power of When, I actually talk about what is the best time of day for sex.
And that's different for men and women.
Well, not only is it different for men and women, but it's different than what you might think, right? So think about what the hormones that you need.
I know what I think.
Right. Well, think about in general, right? So what are the hormones that we need elevated for sex, right? We need estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, cortisol, and adrenaline to be high, and we need melatonin to be low. Right? 74% of people have sex between 10:30 and 11:30 at night.
Which is the worst time.
What do you think their hormone profile looks like? It's terrible, right? It's exactly the opposite of what we would want. So I'm here to say that sex in the morning actually is much better from a connectivity level, from an intimacy level, from a libido level.
From a rested standpoint.
Absolutely. I mean, come on, it's the end of the day. You're exhausted, right? It's no more not tonight I have a headache. It's not tonight I'm too damn tired, right? And so,
well, actually, speaking of headaches, sex can relieve headaches. And of course, we know that men's testosterone levels are highest at 5 o'clock in the morning. And that's why
we have erections.
And heart attack rates are highest in men at 5 o'clock in the morning. Maybe it's because they're all having sex at 5 o'clock in the morning. And that's
no, I don't think it is. I'll tell you, I've got an answer for that one too. So there's actually interesting data looking at early morning heart attack. And it actually happens when people sometimes are coming right out of REM sleep. Seems to be one of the times that it's most prevalent. Really interesting. If you change the timing of your blood pressure medication from morning to just before bed, we reduce heart attacks by 33%.
Wow. But what about
It's
people
a
who aren't on high blood
monster
pressure
number.
medication?
Well, that's just for the blood pressure folks.
What about
That's,
aspirin? What about men who are taking a daily aspirin for
yep, same
prevention
thing.
of cardiac risk? So
Yeah,
they should take it
same.
at night rather than in
They
the
should be
morning.
taking it at night. Absolutely, absolutely.
Excellent. All right, now let's get to the good stuff
Okay,
that everybody's been waiting, and I can hear
weight
people
loss
like
and sleep.
screaming. What about weight loss and
Sure.
sleep?
Okay, so
Tell
let me
us
give you the
the
skinny.
secret to how we could just sleep longer and lose weight and not have to worry about it.
So it's not exactly like that, okay? So here's the deal is if you sleep the amount of sleep that you need, right? So I've been a 6.5 hour sleeper my entire adult life. My wife needs almost 8.5. So once you kind of know what you need, if you can get it consistently, you're in good shape. But if you can't, here are a couple of things that can actually happen due to sleep deprivation. So first of all, when you're sleep deprived, your cortisol levels are raised, which increases your appetite. Now, why is that important? Well, number one, it makes you want to have food, but your cortisol is high, which makes it very difficult to sleep. So you're already up, and now you've got an internal stimulant that's making you stay even more awake. The reason, by the way, that your cortisol increases when you're sleep deprived is because your brain says we need more resources. So it says, go get hungry, have some appetite, get some food in. Second thing that happens is your metabolism slows down. Why? To conserve the resources that are actually in the system. So your brain wants to go find more, but your gut doesn't want to use up all that's in there. Those are two big things. Then we start to look at a hormonal imbalance that occurs with sleep deprivation. One of them is a hormone called ghrelin. That's spelled G-H-R-E-L-I-N. And since it starts with a G, I think of it as the go hormone, right? So that's the hormone that makes you hungry. There's a difference between hunger and appetite. And so you have 20% more go in your system. And then leptin, which is the hormone of satiety or making you feel full, you have 15% less leptin. So just in summary, you got high cortisol, which means high appetite. You got high ghrelin, which means high hunger. You got low leptin, which means you're never going to feel full. And you have low metabolism, which means you're not using up the resources that are in the system.
And insulin.
I can do a whole thing on diabetes and insulin as well.
Well,
but
even non-diabetics and insulin.
Non-diabetics.
Cortisol on insulin, which increases fat storage.
Exactly. And we also know that with 36 hours of sleep deprivation, we can put somebody instantly into a pre-diabetic state.
Wow.
Instantly.
36 consecutive hours?
36 consecutive hours. Now, then they did a study where they looked at...
So I was probably diabetic my whole residency.
Without question, you were. But then they did the same study looking at it where people were just losing an hour to an hour and a half a night. And it took about a week, but you still got there. So again, very, very problematic.
Getting there to being pre-diabetic.
Pre-diabetic, exactly.
Unbelievable.
And then here's the final piece that just kills me, right? It's one thing to know that you're not losing weight very quickly when you're sleep deprived, but it's another thing that it can actually make you gain weight. So a great study at the University of Chicago took sleep deprived individuals who had lost about an hour's worth of sleep each night. By the third or fourth night, they gave them two tables, one with healthy snacks on one side and one with cakes and cookies and pies on the other. Which one do you think they grabbed for?
Cakes, cookies, and pies.
Right. So why is the question?
They want sugar.
They do.
But is that a psychological thing or is that a physiological thing?
It's actually a neurological thing.
Oh, wow.
So
okay,
here's what's interesting. Is because these cortisol levels are jacked up and they stay up, the brain doesn't like it when it's full of cortisol, okay? So if you eat high caloric, high fat foods, it elevates serotonin, which then makes you feel calm, and that's why it happens. So
serotonin also makes you feel sleepy, which is why you crash after you eat a high sugar snack,
Exactly. That's why they call it comfort food. It makes you feel comfortable, right? And so your body will actually crave these high-fat foods. So it's really not your fault. You just got to get better sleep.
Is it the sugar or the fat that you're craving, or both?
I think it's the sugar more so than the fat. Nobody's actually been able to delineate that aspect of the relationship other than we're pretty sure that we crave those things in order to jack up our serotonin to make our cortisol go back down.
Well, that's why it's said that chocolate is the perfect food because it's 50% fat and 50% sugar. And that's dairy chocolate, milk chocolate.
Yes.
Which I'm a big fan of. I actually believe that some people have a gene for some people are team dark chocolate, and some people are team dairy chocolate. So what are your top tips for people then as far as how healthy sleep can help them manage their weight issues?
Okay, so I'm going to give people a 5-step program that they can start tonight. It's not difficult, and it's going to help everybody sleep better and lose weight. You ready?
Awesome. Here we go. Everybody take notes who's not driving. And if you are driving, you can always listen to this again when you get home.
Yeah.
And in about a few weeks, we'll have the video version as well.
Perfect. So step number 1 is to stick to one schedule. So whatever your schedule is during the week, I'm sorry to say, it needs to be the same on the weekends. If you get up at 6:30 during the week, I'm sorry, get up at 6:30 on the weekends. You can stay up a little bit later.
I don't like you anymore.
I know. Trust me, people call me Dr. Evil after a while. So stick to one schedule. Step number 2 is stop caffeine by 2 p.m.
Oh,
we know that caffeine.
Okay.
Well, we know that caffeine has a half-life of anywhere between 6 and 8 hours.
Okay.
And so for people, especially those that are caffeine sensitive, it's really a good idea to stop at 2 p.m. Step number 3 has to do with alcohol. Stop alcohol 3 hours before bed. That way because you probably haven't had more than 2 glasses of wine, at least I hope not. Mm-hmm. So that gives you enough time to be able to kind of metabolize through it. Step number 4 has to do with exercise. The single best way to improve the quality of your sleep is 20 minutes of daily exercise. I'm not talking about running a marathon here. Take the dog for a walk.
You can't do it in 20 minutes.
No, certainly not. But get some exercise, but stop about 4 hours before bed, because some people can get really revved up from exercise, and that can be a deterrent for sleep. And then step number 5 is to give the sun a high five every morning and get 15 minutes of sunlight. So in summary, step number 1, stick to one sleep schedule. Step number 2, stop caffeine by 2 p.m. Step number 3, stop alcohol 3 hours before bed. See where I'm going?
I get
Step
it.
number 4, stop exercise 4 hours before bed. And step number 5, give the sun a high five every morning.
I like that. That was very clever. I'm quick on the uptake there. And I was going to say, we didn't discuss exercise and sleep. Is there a time of day that's ideal? And do you also recommend that people really ideally should exercise the same time every day as part of this whole schedule thing, or is it just whenever you can fit it in?
No, it's yes and yes. So in my book, The Power of When, I actually delineate exercise out to things like yoga and stretching, team sports, cardio, and strength training. And based on your internal biological clock, there are different times that are better for each one. Basically, if you want to burn fat, you want to exercise on an empty stomach early in the morning, not a non-hydrated stomach. Let me be super clear about that. I want you guzzling the water. Okay. Really, hydration is the easiest way
but
to
exercising on an empty stomach?
If you want to lose weight. If you want it from a performance standpoint, like let's say you're training to run on a race, or you want to do these tough mudder things, or you're a cyclist or whatever, then you actually want to exercise as close to race time as possible, so your body gets used to being able to exercise at that time. We all know that we have peak hours of alertness. And so truly the absolute best time to exercise is usually between 10 and 12 most days.
Okay. And most people can't exercise during that time, except.
Yeah, it depends. I mean, I have people who will go out and walk, or I have people who will like bring their lunch and then exercise before lunch and then have a quick lunch and then be able to go back to work.
This was fabulous. I have learned so much, and I am definitely going to listen to this again with my pen and take notes. And I reserve the right to call you back and
as many times as you want.
Yeah, I'm sure we're going to get tons of questions.
Oh, good.
On this.
Well, let's do a Q&A next time.
Absolutely. Where can people find you online and in the Twitterverse?
Sure. So I'm super easy to find online. It's just thesleepdoctor.com. And I have the same Facebook handle and Twitter handle, The Sleep Doctor. So if you're out there, and if you go to my Facebook page, there's a little button in the upper right-hand corner that says send a message. If you click on that and you send a message that says free sleep course, you'll be signed up for a free sleep course where I'll send you tips and tricks for like 7 days. And I'm not trying to get your credit card or any of this silliness. It's just information for you to learn more about sleep.
I would give you my credit card if you could get me to sleep better on a regular basis. You know, I realized one thing I never got you to say is tell us how many million people suffer from chronic insomnia.
Oh gosh. Chronic
meaning
insomnia.
More than 30 days in a row.
Yeah. Chronic insomnia, you're looking at 10% of the population. So you're looking at about 37 million people that have, that's a lot of people that have got chronic insomnia. We think that close to a third of Americans are suffering from at any given time. So now we're up to over 100 million people that are suffering from it at any point in time, with roughly 37 or so chronic every night, terrible sleep.
Which is a huge sleep deficit, and we can't really recuperate, regain that. All right, so last question. What's the most important question I forgot to ask you?
The most important question you forgot to ask me? I don't know. How do I sleep?
How do you sleep?
I'm actually a pretty good sleeper. I didn't get involved in this because I'm a bad sleeper. I got involved with it because I just find it so fascinating. So I would tell you that you don't have to be a bad sleeper to learn about how to sleep better, because I've learned over the years how to sleep better, and I wasn't a bad sleeper to begin with. So for folks out there, feel free to check out my blogs or check out any of my books. I'm happy to help, and I want to wish everybody sweet dreams.
Thank you, and thank you so much for joining us in the ladies' room. Take care and have a good workout.
Thanks.
Bye. That's all we have time for today, but let's keep the conversation going on Twitter or Facebook at Dr. Donica. And please join us next week for another episode of In the Ladies' Room with Dr. Donica. Real conversations with real women about really intimate topics.